All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Afterword. I'm excited.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I am.
You're caffeinated.
Woo! Well, I'm back from vacation.
Welcome back
Italy,
from Europe.
Yes.
Both of
Espresso
you.
shots.
Well, yes, it was. There was espresso or cappuccinos every day.
Cappuccinos.
Dave's not a coffee guy.
I'm not, but it's so good in Italy. It's so good. Sometimes, you know what the best thing I had to eat, though? Can I tell you?
Yeah.
I know.
Steak Florentine.
Ooh.
I thought you were going to say gelato.
Nice,
well,
man.
I had gelato almost every day.
Steak Florentine.
It
Sounds
was
awesome.
so we bought it by the kilo. Wow. We got 2.2 kilos, which is 4.5 pounds of meat.
I don't know my kilos.
It's dry. I don't either. It's
4.5 pounds.
they dry age it for several weeks, and then
You're talking about you went to the butcher and bought the meat and cooked it.
no.
in your
I went to a
Airbnb or
restaurant called the
something?
Four Lions.
Oh, okay.
Quattro Leones, I think in Italian.
Okay.
If I'm right.
Right here, there's 3 lines.
Okay.
We're just missing one. And while we were there, the waiter brings out the meat, and it's just a massive amounts, and it's like basically T-bone, but it's dry aged,
Yeah, nice.
and it's the butcher that makes the meat good
yeah.
because it's the way the preparation, and then they cook it in this really unique way, like stand it on end for 3 minutes, stand it on this end for 3 minutes.
How do you do your steak? Medium rare?
No, so they
or-
don't ask you.
Oh,
They're like,
you eat it the way they.
yeah,
Yes.
we prepare it the way, and
Yeah,
they
we're
ask
not
you.
butchering this with
Yes.
extra well done for you. You're just
Correct.
eating it the way we. Yeah.
They say,
yes.
do you want it like rare or not as rare? That's
Oh,
the only
okay,
option you
okay,
have.
Gotcha.
And
So you
I
have a
said,
little bit of an option.
just a tiny margin.
Yep.
And I said not quite as rare because I like, and it was unbelievable.
Did you cry?
Mm.
A
Well,
little
yes,
tear?
and just it was one of the best, if not the best steak I've ever eaten in my life.
Yeah.
And,
Wow, that's cool.
And to answer a question, yes, I have been to Outback Steakhouse. So, no, like I remember Jay Alexander's and Ruth's Chris and all those high end steakhouses. This rivals
was the
all
best,
of
huh?
this rivals all of
Man.
those. So yeah,
That's awesome.
it was pretty great.
So when you say not as rare, what does it come out like? Medium rare, kind
no,
of
it's
pink
just
in the middle,
no,
or is
pink
it
red?
Pink red. Okay,
but
yeah.
it was butter.
That's awesome.
It was butter. A T-bone that
Yeah.
it was like filet mignon.
Wow.
It was unbelievably tender.
That's incredible, man.
It was awesome. What was the best thing you ate?
Well, definitely gelato.
Oh,
Yeah.
what kind of
I mean, I had
gelato?
a lot of great meals, but we would kind of go from town to town in Italy, and I would always get stracciatella.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of like that was the bar. And there was one particular place in Tuscany.
So for the folks that don't know, tell
Yeah.
them what stracciatella is.
It's like basically vanilla cream, but with like chocolate kind of.
It's like chocolate chips?
like ribbon, but hard.
Yes, but
Yeah.
it's like
So good.
shavings.
Yeah, that's the right way to say it. And we went to a little town in Tuscany region, and they had a sign that said the best gelato in Italy, but they won awards, all kinds of stuff.
wow, yeah.
And there was like probably 50 people standing in line
Oh,
all
wow.
day long.
Always
in
a
the hot
good sign.
sun.
Yeah.
Oh, it was the best.
And you had stracciatella there?
That's
At least
awesome.
twice a day.
You know what? My daughter discovered a flavor, and she didn't get anything else the entire time. Melon, which is
Melon.
cantaloupe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Unbelievably refreshing,
yeah.
especially on hot days, because it was like 100 degrees.
Yeah.
So I think what the people listening want is to see our vacation slides. I think that's really what they came here for.
Yeah.
But we're back. We're back in the book of Matthew, and
Yes.
you guys, let's get into this because it's an important part in the story, and we're gonna. It's where Jesus kind of basically asked Peter, everyone's talking about me. Like, who do you say I am? Mm-hmm. And Peter's response is particular, and it's kind of defining moment because it's one of the first times that a character in this narrative, we know that Jesus is the Messiah. We've seen the virgin birth as we've seen the baptism in the dove come and the voice from heaven.
Yeah.
We've seen him defeat Satan in the desert. We've seen the miracles. We've seen the teaching. So we're following along, but this is a public proclamation from Peter, and Jesus kind of affirms this. So this is that why this is so important? Because we're supposed to look like Matthew is setting Peter up as the audience, and we're supposed to identify, and his proclamation is supposed to be our proclamation. Is that where you see it narratively? How do you see this moment?
Yeah, I mean, Peter says the words, "You are the Messiah," and that obviously is profound, but there are non-Jewish Gentile outsiders who've recognized Jesus before Peter, and I think that's intentional too. Matthew's writing to a Jewish audience. The story right before this, you know, this Matthew calls her a Canaanite woman,
Right.
You know, which is, we talked about that a couple Sundays ago. She calls him the son of David, which is a messianic phrase.
Yeah.
So I think it's supposed to do both. I think it's...
Even the centurion kind of recognizes that you're something different than a man.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So I think it's supposed to do both of those things. One, like Peter says, it's the first time Jesus asks the question. So that's significant. Those other times, it's not like he asked the Canaanite woman, well, who do you think I am? She just says it.
You're right.
Son of David, you know, have mercy on me. But he asked the question here, and I think that's what's significant. And it's sort of like the epic reveal moment in the text, like you said. Jesus is clear. The story's been hinting at it, and now finally Jesus says, "Okay, well, who do you think I am? Like, who do you say I am?" And then Peter says the words, you know, Mashiach, Messiah. You're the Christ, essentially, is what he says. That's literally what he says. So it is a great reveal, but yeah, there's been hints of it leading up.
I think some of the work, Jay, you did that, I got to share with the South Hills team, just the context of where this question is being asked and Peter's response. I think that was really fresh for me. So I think that's part of it too, as far as answering your question, Dave, as far as what's going on here.
That Matthew is trying to key us in that Caesarea Philippi is this important kind of place.
Yeah, I mean, to his original audience, he wouldn't have had to do that.
Right, but to
you know
us,
what he says is, then they enter Caesarea Philippi, and that's about 25 miles north of Galilee, the region where most of Jesus' work is done. So 25 miles is not that far, you know, and people would have known. It was a pretty major city. They were like, oh, holy smokes, that place, you know, full of idols. That place, the city's actual name implies that
Caesar.
it's dedicated to Caesar and to Herod, to one of the Herods.
Yeah.
You know, and we talked about it in the teaching, but before that it was called Paneas, after Pan. You know,
and his
Greek
Labyrinth,
god,
the
Pan.
David Bowie movie.
Yeah,
is that one? Is that one?
exactly.
Panera? Is it after the overpriced hospital food?
Hospital food.
That's what.
That's amazing.
That's what.
Apologies to our sponsor, Panera Bread.
Yeah, I know somebody here who works at Panera.
Yeah,
Panera used to be called.
You.
It used to be called the.
Jenny actually really enjoys Panera.
It used to be called the St. Louis Bread Company, and it was based out of St. Louis, and it was unbelievable, and it spread, and people like it. I get it. I was just kidding.
I'm not a huge fan.
Okay, anyway.
It's okay.
So Pan,
I like the apple.
But
you're
saying
get an apple with it.
That's true.
Pan was where we get the name Panic, right?
Yeah,
The Greek
Peter
god.
Pan. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, anyways, all that to say, to Andy's point, Jesus asked the question in a very specific, strategic place.
Yeah.
Because that was a city that said the gods amongst us are all of these different various sort of gods of the pantheon, and Jesus says, he's making a statement like, no, it's me, like I'm the guy that's come to rescue and restore.
So this is where it gets a little difficult, I think, for modern audiences to enter into the ancient world. The idea of a whole bunch of gods being worshipped daily. I had a friend who came, who was a missionary and came back to the States and was in Indonesia. And remember there was an earthquake and there was this, and so they were doing some relief work out there. And there were people who would literally sacrifice a chicken on behalf of the village. They would rotate and put the blood like in a bowl every morning. Yeah. Because the dark spirits would come and afflict, and they had different, gods that they would name that he didn't even know all their names.
Yeah.
That feels super, I think, alien to a lot of modern people in the Bay Area, where I think people would say we're post lots of things.
Yeah.
But your point is that we're kind of not. That humans actually still have idols and gods. They're just named different things.
Yeah.
And that's the human condition.
I think the first thing, I mean, it didn't come up in the teaching, but I think it was Keller who has done some good work to just say that perspective of your friend in Indonesia, that's the dominant perspective. There's an awareness of a spiritual world and God's little g's, and this idolatry, this worship's actually the predominant sort of worldview. We just live in a strange little bubble
Yeah.
that sees things very differently.
But we still have temples. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
it's
have
more
big,
subversive,
giant buildings that are dedicated to commerce and to sport and to entertainment. You know, I was thinking about like Vegas just had. Did you see what they erected? This giant sphere.
Oh yeah.
And it
I
has
saw
like-
it in person.
No, you did
a
not.
couple weeks ago for Summer League. Yeah.
Oh, you went to Las
Yeah, I
Vegas.
talked
for
about it
this?
in the teaching.
Oh,
I
I
was in
did.
Vegas for a day, and yeah.
So there's something
Yeah,
there.
I mean, we have coliseums. They literally are coliseums.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, yeah.
where
Yeah.
we wear the same color, and sometimes we sing the same songs, and we cheer.
Mr. Brightside
for,
by the Killers. Yeah,
we
that's what-
cheer for the same, heroes.
Sure.
Who are gods amongst us in some ways, and happens every Sunday in our country
yeah.
for like 6 months a year, and Saturdays, on college campuses, and then it happens, like 7 days a week in the cathedrals we call malls. I mean, it's just it happens,
Yeah.
all the time. James K. Smith in You Are What You Love, and then his more academic sort of book, I think it's Desiring the Kingdom. He's got a whole treatment he does on shopping malls in America and how they are really the modern cathedral, and their worship services.
with rituals.
Yeah, and an exchange, a monetary exchange
Yeah.
for a value, and like he gets into the details of like sights and sounds and smells, and sort of
Like Cinnabon. Cinnabon is a incense.
honestly, he would say, yeah, like in a weird way,
Movie theater popcorn.
yes,
right?
all that
Yeah.
stuff, and it's all they
To
didn't.
satiate-
The
yeah.
American, whoever invented malls, they didn't whip that up out of thin air. It's all like human psychology stuff. We're like worshiping creatures. We worship things.
Yeah.
So it's not just malls. It's all sorts of things. But yeah, we still worship is the point.
Right.
Yeah, we still have idols.
So one of the things you're forcing us to do is kind of examine where we might have idols, because that's really important work, and it does seem like that's a little bit of what Jesus is pulling Peter and his disciples out of. There is a way of behaving and living, which is very common in this town, Caesarea Philippi, and very common in the ancient world. I'm trying to pull you out of that to refocus or recenter you around me and my work and my kingdom, not Caesar, not all his things going on. And you put it that, and you guys both quoted Tim Keller. He did a book, Counterfeit Gods, right?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
and it's an idol is anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give what only God can give.
Yeah.
So in that way, we're still just as religious as the ancient folks,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we wouldn't call these things idols or consider it worship, but when all of your intention and energy and resources and imagination are going towards that, you do have to ask the question, what is that?
Yeah.
And we would say it's worship. And in the society we're in, lots of things are subtly worshipped or more overtly, like through books or podcasts celebrated, just the idea of financial success or stability, which is a good thing when it's worshipped and made an ultimate thing, right? It becomes an idol.
Yeah.
And people, it's an idol when it's taken away and people come undone. When I get angry,
Okay.
or when I become undone,
Sure.
when it starts touching some existential part of me, like I'm not safe because ... or I am great.
So when a
because-
reaction internally is pretty intense,
Yeah.
that's a good sign that something really is wrong inside? Is that a good litmus test you're saying?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think some great writers have talked about that idea of just, you'll know it's an idol when it's removed, or the threat of it being removed, or somebody's asking you to share it and you're not willing to share it and you just start feeling that sort of tremor in your soul.
Anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And through that lens, I think we could probably tease out, there's a lot of those kinds of things in our valley, right here, the idea of having kids who perform perfectly, having the perfect kids that look like a certain sort of psychographic sort of model that we've all kind of ascribe to, and when they're not, oh no, something's wrong with them, something's wrong with me.
Right.
You know, we have lots.
Yeah. Your kid getting into that good school so that you can kind of feel good about it. That's education unlocks doors.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Is there another test that we can do? Because I think a lot of people listening would be like, I don't want to have an idol. I know it's bad, but the diagnostic work of doing this is hard. Is there a spiritual practice that you guys? Is there a way to for you guys that you found helpful for identifying these idols? Is it just solid? I find when I go on vacation and I unplug from stuff, I come back with fresh eyes. Maybe you had a couple weeks in June. Did you come back with fresh eyes into this? Does that help you? Is it what are the things that have helped you identify?
That's a good question.
Like the real icky things that have subtly shifted us and pulled us away from God. What do you find?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of diagnostics, I think what Andy said is probably, or for me has been probably the most helpful, you know, paying very,
attention.
very mindful attention and honestly assessing my own reactivity when something valuable to me is either taken away or disrupted, or the threat of disruption looms large. That's almost always the best indicator for me. And asking the question, okay, how open and willing and able am I to surrender my anxiety about the potential threat to this particular part of my life? How willing and able am I to surrender that to the Lord? And then how much peace do I sense there, you know? So going on that journey is probably the most helpful diagnostic. And it's good things and bad things and neutral things. You know, it's like my family can be an idol, you know, like Andy said, it could be my children and how they perform, you know, on the sort of public social stage, you know, it could be, and those are like, technically they're good things. They're really wonderful things that can become idolatrous things when I'm unable to reckon with the reality that my children and my family, my wife, they're gifts given to me by God to steward, to serve, and to surrender back to Him for His glory and for the good of the world, including their own good. And, you know, so it's not to say I don't put any effort. I'm like, oh, you're the Lord's and whatever. Just no. I think it's about perspective in why we put forth the effort we put forth. And then there's like vices in our lives, I think, that can also become idolatrous. You know, you just think about the stranglehold that various addictions can have on us.
Yeah.
And in those cases, sometimes it can be, not always is, but it can be a little bit more obvious that, oh my gosh, this is becoming an idol in my life. It's a little more incognito when it's a good thing, you know, like family.
Yeah.
It's very easy to spiritualize. Like, well,
I'm doing this for my
trying
kids.
to love my, you know. But with vices, where it gets harder is typically things that are more obviously not so great for us, not in alignment with God's will. You know, one of the most rampant ones nationally would be pornography, right? Most people would agree, like, and almost all followers of Jesus would agree, pornography is not God's will. It's not God's design for healthy, flourishing human sexuality.
Yeah.
This is totally outside the boundaries of it's, you know, it's the source of great shame, all those sorts of things. And where those types of idols are more challenging, it's not necessarily the sort of like, oh my gosh, I'm spiritualizing it and justifying it. It's more emotional, psychological, physiological, you know?
And shame too.
Yeah, all
Right.
of that
Yeah,
stuff.
You don't
But,
want to,
of course,
you
shame,
don't want to bring it up.
yeah,
right?
shame is a yeah, exactly. Shame is sort of a result sometimes, but the sort of stranglehold it has on you is, you know, addiction is just a very powerful thing. So where because you're asking the question, like, how do you identify and then
diagnostics,
move forward? You
Yeah.
know, it's exactly what you just said. And we talk about this a lot here. A part of the whole journey of belonging to a community, a part of that is like bringing the stuff that's so hard to bring to light, bringing it to light. What I'm not saying
to
is
certain trusted people.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
What I'm not saying
In
is
community.
we stand in front of everybody
Yeah.
and say
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Hey, everyone, I don't know you, but here's all my junk."
Yeah.
Right.
That's why community really matters. All those various spaces, you know, public and social, personal, and even intimate space with counseling or a mentor. That's one of the most powerful tools, I think, to sort of break our idolatrous addictions. You know?
It was interesting. We have a lab here. It's a marriage lab at South Hills that we're going through the Alpha marriage course. The Alpha is a big course that we've done for years, but the marriage course is something new, and so we're piloting it. And last night was on sexuality and sex and marriage, and they were talking. Henry Cloud was one of the guest speakers, and he said that he had this really interesting perspective about pornography. He said it's a cistern that holds no water. And people go to it because they think, oh, this will help with my loneliness or my rejection or my sense of
that's right.
So you're going to it for legitimate needs to be met, but it can't possibly.
Yeah.
And so getting out of that and acknowledging that with other people and saying, here's what I actually want, here's what I actually am going for, and then having the courage to say that. He was like, that's the way out of this.
That's good.
I hadn't thought about vices being an idol. But you're right, because you're going to them for what what you want God to provide, you know?
Yeah, there's that verse. We read it in the teaching, Psalm 115. What you just said reminds me of it. The psalmist says, their idols are silver and gold made by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, feet but cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats. And then here's the key. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. So you think, you know, what Henry Cloud, it's an empty cistern. We go to it to provide us something that it cannot possibly provide. There's that Keller quote, I think you said it earlier, about an idol is anything that absorbs our hearts and imaginations, and we believe that it can give us something that only God can give, right?
Yeah.
And what's really profound for me and sort of convicting about what the psalmist says in Psalm 115 is that the people who make those idols become like them, but also people who trust in those idols become like them.
Yeah.
And you think about people who have found freedom, for example, because we're talking about it, from addiction to porn, right? I've heard some of their stories. It's so fascinating what almost in some way they all say the version of the same thing, that they were going to their addiction to fulfill them, but it was leaving them more and more empty.
Yeah.
And actually what broke them from the addiction was tasting and seeing the goodness of a life that was actually fulfilling, right? In God and in meaningful relationship.
Right.
And it helped. It's like they snapped out of what the psalmist is saying here. It's like, oh my gosh, that's all empty. It's all fake. And because I trusted in them, I was becoming empty. I was becoming like almost not totally fully human. And in some ways, you know, people say you can't break an addiction by trying to not be addicted. You almost have to become addicted to something else, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of it. We've got to become addicted to life and life to the full, the way Jesus offers it to us. And that's the way. That's the path out of all the emptiness, you know? that
Did
so
you
many of
just
us
quote
feel.
Carmen, Addicted to Jesus? I think.
Carmen from the 90s?
Yeah. Is that what you just did?
I was once
Addicted to-
once demon number 2 in the skit The Champion by Carmen. You remember that?
Satan Bite the Dust.
Yeah. No, I think it was called The
I
Champion.
have no idea what you guys are
Oh,
talking
Yeah,
about.
man, Carmen, dude. Look it up.
Pretty excited
YouTube.
about
Don't
That's
look it
great.
up. It's terrible.
I do know who Peter Pan is.
Yeah.
You know, you asked a great question, like how do you know? What are some other diagnostics? I think a couple weeks ago you talked about this gap between myself, like who I'm projecting to be versus who I am. And I think you used Psalm 139, which to me I love. It's just these moments like on a day-to-day basis, you know,
Search me.
some saints over the years have just basically created a practice of just like, hey God, is there any offensive way in me? Is there, and really just inviting his spirit. It doesn't have to be once a day, but just like learning to kind of clue in like, wow, this meeting matters too much. I was left out of this meeting. I'm feeling all like insecure and weird. Like, and the Holy Spirit will be like, hey man, Like, notice that.
Yeah.
Like, you're enough in me. You're like, why are you turning your work into an idol, right? Like, there's these moments with the Spirit. So to me, that's one diagnostic of just kind of like listening to the Spirit. And you just got to practice that. That's one thing. And then the other one is, I agree with Jay. I think like community is a big deal. And it's hard. It's embarrassing. But I've been in places and moments where people will be like, dude, like, do you see yourself the way we see you right now? Like, and in a loving way, but
that's vulnerable.
Truth-telling way, like, hey,
Yeah.
buddy. And I just think I heard Jay recently quoted again, just that idea. You just can't do this kind of self-assessment. You need other people. Like, the Christian life is impossible to do alone. And so if we really want to say, Jesus, you are the Messiah, you are the one I'm trusting, et cetera, I think like having a community, like a life group or whoever, to walk and journey with you, who know you really well, who know those areas that are probably your main temptations, whether it's work or like your muscles and you do crazy like amounts of weights, or your children or pornography, whatever it is, these people who know, like, hey, let me invite you back to that question that you've been asked thousands of times. Like, who do you think Jesus is?
Yeah.
It strikes me also that you talk about, like, you have the chart kind of using God to get your stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff that you want, your desires, your wishes, your dreams, your goals.
Yeah.
Like, hey, God, cool, great. Now, if you could help me get this, that'd be awesome, because that's really what I want.
Right.
And that feels really, first of all, kind of American. Second of all, really kind of Silicon Valley. And third, like, really human. Like, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
How is there I guess the question is, like, how do we, sometimes we know when we're doing that, but sometimes the things, our goals, they seem spiritual.
Yeah.
Like, you even talked about, like, church in general, like, or doing good things, or living out the things that we feel like God's put inside of us,
Yep.
So, like, how do we know that?
I think what you're saying is really good. I'm just jumping in because I would hate for somebody to hear in this valley where people have literally moved to this area and at great sacrifice to be here, to do a thing. I would hate for them to hear like, oh, like God doesn't want you to be passionate or to pursue a thing or to hustle like that. I don't think that's what was said at all, but I can understand some people, as soon as you lean into this conversation.
The only way to be holy is to be a monk and to live in the desert. That's not what we're saying.
And just be like, meh. Yeah, that's not it. Yeah, you're asking the question, like, how do you know when it's slipped from healthy ambition into, is that
yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think the idea, because ambition is all over this valley, and productivity is all over this valley.
Yeah.
And some of that's really beautiful. That's the way God has made us to be productive. We're image bearers. We can make, we can work. We have tremendous capacity for it, right?
Yeah.
So it's the idea of using God to get it. That's another diagnostic. It's like, how do you, like you said, search me, oh God, that makes a lot of sense for some of this stuff. But some of this stuff, it's like, well, I feel like I'm made to do this. Like, how do you tease out when you're using God for the thing instead of relishing in God himself?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the point of that whole exercise was to ask the question primarily not about our desires and our plans and our stuff. It's actually to ask the question, because the text, Jesus is asking a question about himself. So like, who do you say I am? And it's more about where God is in that whole process. Because I do think it's not like, it's not like you shouldn't have desires. It's not like you shouldn't have plans. It's not like you shouldn't, like work hard and provide a life for yourself and succeed. All those like wonderful things, which we said in the teaching. That's not the point. The point is, where is God in that process? Because if God is a tool, like the Augustine quote, idolatry is worshiping anything that ought to be used and using anything that ought to be worshipped, which to me is very helpful.
Oh, wow.
Because usually we think about idolatry just as the first part. It's like, oh, I shouldn't worship the stuff that are tools.
Yeah.
It's like, fair enough. But also, Augustine's point, idolatry also works the other way. If you use something or someone that actually deserves your worship, that's a weird sort of strange backwards way of being idolatrous,
Yeah.
because you're misplacing in our sort of estimation as followers of Jesus, you're misplacing the God who deserves everything your entire life. So yeah, work hard, like hustle, do your thing, leverage your gifts and your unique abilities, and that will bear fruit in some form or fashion. And I'm not saying like it's not some weird health and wealth gospel thing. It's like work hard and get rich. I don't know. Like maybe you'll be uber successful and be a multimillionaire or billionaire or whatever, or you're just like providing a nice life for your family or whatever. I don't know, but either way. The point is, where is God in the process?
Yeah.
Is he a tool you pull out of your back pocket to get you to the place you want to go? Or is he on the far side of all of that effort, all of that energy, having journeyed right alongside you as your father? Is he on the far side of your success and your achievements and all of that? Is he the center of it all? Like, do you look to him and say, thank you, God? Mm-hmm. Like, this is from you and for you. Mm-hmm. And in whatever way possible, through all that you've given me, the gifts of my life, my family, my success, my achievements, whatever, man, I want to do my best to bring you glory. I want people to know, like, this is because of God, and it is for God, And for God, we talk about this a lot at Westgate, for God extends itself. It bleeds into the world as, bringing good to others, right? God says what's the greatest commandment? Love God and love your neighbor. And then he prays that beautiful prayer in John 17, love one another, right? So that's why it comes down to the three loves for us always. And I think that's the point we're trying to make. Like, yeah, it's not, it's not everyone go be a desert father and be an ascetic and live in the wilderness and caves. Although if that's what God's called you to do,
some people are
great.
starting to move out of California.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I heard somebody moved to Tennessee. That's kind of like a cave.
Wow. A lot of Tennessee hate from Dave. I don't know why. Dave's from Ohio, so I don't know.
There's a rivalry.
I don't know what it's like out there. Yeah, I think that's the point.
Yeah.
It's where is God in that process,
Yeah, and the question, interesting that Jesus asked, "Who do you say I am?" And then Peter's response is one of character formation for Peter. Like, this is what Jesus is most primarily interested in, is what's going on inside of Peter.
Yeah, and
not so much what Peter does do great things for the rest of the story, but he also messes up quite a bit, and the whole thing is Jesus the center.
Yeah,
for Peter. And that's the invitation, I think, for us, is Jesus our center. What does that look like to make him more and more the center and more? And I think when that happens, the other stuff probably falls away a bit.
Yeah, I don't even know that it's making him the center. I know what you're saying. What I would say is, like, it doesn't matter what you think or believe. Jesus is the center of the human story. So the only choice we have is whether we live in alignment and recognition of that reality or live misaligned. It's like being a planet in the universe and saying the sun is not the center, it's me. And almost forcibly imagining that the rotation you are making around the sun is actually the sun rotating around you. You can believe that, but it's a lie. Like, you are orbiting around the sun.
Yeah.
And that is reality. And if you choose to live outside of that reality, you're living a lie. You're living a falsehood, and it will have all sorts of effects on your life.
Right.
And I think that's, again, to your point about emptiness, that's what it comes down to. It's just a total misalignment with reality. Like, Jesus is the center of all things. He's the Messiah, the Christ, the chosen one, the anointed one who's come to, right.
Is there another phrase you would use besides making Jesus the center, or other language that's been more helpful, do you think?
No, I was just...
I didn't, like you're saying, it's super true what you're saying.
On an individual level, I think I get what you're saying. It's like, live in recognition of the fact that Jesus is the center. Because you're right. We can make other things the center of our own little worlds. But when we live that way, we're just living misaligned.
And I love that it's like a kid who thinks they can jump off the roof and fly. It's just, that's not physics.
Yeah, right.
I think it's like, again, just trying to be uber practical with what that looks like, the contrast between the two. Again, just thinking of like somebody who works in an office, like when you're trying to make Jesus the center, when he's the king, when we're surrendering, when this person's surrendering their job, They're like, okay, I'm going in today, and I got this important meeting, and I'm full of ambition. I want this thing to go up and to the right. And then there's some moment. It could be just like a tiny prayer, but just like, this is your meeting. This is your work. This is your good ideas you've given me. I can't really manifest where this goes. I want to try, and I think you've given me, but like, God, I surrender this to you, to your glory, to somebody else. When Jesus isn't the center, when I'm operating in such a way that I'm that planet that I think everything orbits around me, it's like, oh my God, I have this meeting. It better, it must, it has to. We have to land on this thing. If not, you know. And there's just this sort of undoneness. This, I don't know what the right word
anxiety.
is. Anxiety.
Yeah. Tension. Yeah.
And literally, as they walk in, they are making that meeting, everybody in that meeting, all about themselves. And it's the opposite of giving God glory or for the good of the world. It's actually about them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I know what that, I thank God I have examples of both in my life, but unfortunately, I know when I have made a meeting or a kid or an ambition about myself, and it really does lead to this really isolated, lonely, terrible, even if it's just 5 minutes, maybe not super existential, but the invitation of Jesus to Peter and to us is like, hey, come back, man. Like, come back to reality.
Yeah.
Like, I really am the king, and you can entrust me with everything that's so important in your life. Mm-hmm. Every good thing you can trust and surrender. Doesn't mean it's always going to go up to the right, to your point. This isn't some prosperity gospel, but even in the challenging moments, like, I'm still the king. I'm undoing all sad things, right? I'm making everything good in its time. Romans, I'm making good things out of every. What's the verse I'm trying to say? You guys remember?
Behold, I'm making all things new.
No.
I work together for good.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. For all who are called according to his purpose and love him. Like, we can surrender those things to him, knowing that big picture, even if not in this life, in eternity, like, for his glory and the good of the world and for ours.
Yeah.
That it's worth surrendering to him. So I don't know. To me, it's just like very practical. When I'm getting angsty and I am the center of the universe, there's probably an idol.
There's just to close, there's two phrases you've used over and over again, Jay. We can't control results, so trust them to God, and be faithful.
Yeah.
Faithful to God. And those things actually start alleviating that anxiety.
Yeah.
Because if you can't control outcomes, and we can't, then we can just trust God to those.
Right.
That's a way of relinquishing that idol. And then the other is faithful. That my job is faithfulness to Jesus the King.
Yeah.
And if I do that, then something's going on in me, and then I can be that has a way of tamping down the anxiety, or at least diffusing it. At least those two phrases have been really helpful for me. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys. Thanks for this. Thanks for, man, there's a lot in this. There's a lot more. So in your life groups and your small groups and your conversation with your spouses and your friends, having these in with God himself in your private prayer times, these are great questions to ask. Is there any wayward way within me? Is there any idol, anything I'm using? What's Augustine's quote again?
Yeah, idolatry is worshiping anything that ought to be used and using anything that ought to be worshipped.
That's a good journal prompt.
I have that tattooed on my back.
No, you
actually.
don't.
I just did it.
I've got a hippo. Because Augustine of Hippo? No,
nice.
That was
nice.
That was a terrible joke.
Dude.
All right,
That was a dad joke.
that was terrible. All right, well, thanks guys, and we'll see you.
you.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
see you next week, guys.
Bye.